So I'm going to talk to you all about something that is near and dear to my heart. And actually, the work I'm going to share with you was work that was pre-COVID. But I felt like in the world that I was working in with Symantec in particular, we had so many things going on that required lots of agility, ability to adapt to change rapidly. And it required not only the business, but the HR organization to behave differently and have to step into the work differently and show up differently. So I'm super hopeful and excited to share this with you because I believe it has so much application to where we are today and helping us set up our success for the future. So with that, let me jump into what I'm going to talk about today. First, I'm going to talk about today's reality. It may be therapeutic for you all. It's really acknowledging and affirming where we're at and where we need to go. I'm very big into frameworks. And early on in my HR career, when I was at PepsiCo and Disney, I was taught that if you've got a strong framework, then you can actually pull your work through that. So I'm going to offer up some frameworks that have worked for me as a leader around how you align organizations. And then you can align organizations through frameworks, but you also have to have the soft tissue and trust, which is all the work you do between frameworks around making certain people trust each other, are open to feedback, taking and giving, and are really committed together to be successful. And then a couple of case studies around things that we actually apply towards the work that I'm going to share with you today. So hopefully, strap on your seatbelt. Should be an interesting discussion. I'll provide some business context, and we'll drive into some of the alignment work that we did. So I think, before this was all said and done, we were already going through macro disruption. We had things related to what jobs are going to be growing in our industries. Do we have people properly trained and ready? How do we think about recruiting, both from a knowledge and innovation perspective, the different segments of employees that we were dealing with, whether it was millennials, employees that are aging in the workforce. Of course, the large topic around representation, and then this little box on the far right, which is flexible work mobility. All things that were challenging us as business leaders that we had to constantly juggle in addition to running the business every day. And this fun thing came up known as pandemic and racial injustice. And a pandemic is something new. We've been talking about the challenge and the potential for a pandemic. Racial injustice is not new. Unfortunately, it's come to the spotlight in a way that makes us really take pause and listen and do something about it. But it's just added to the complexity of what we already were dealing with in the world. So what I'm going to submit to you is the work that I'm going to share with you was really more around the macro disruptions before pandemic, but I think everything in racial injustice I'm going to share with you can be applied towards that. So just a quick context for Symantec. So Symantec really no longer exists. It was the largest cybersecurity security company in the world, software company, and it was recently divested, and now it's mostly owned by Broadcom on the enterprise side, but on the consumer side, it's a new company called NortonLifeLock. And I stepped down in February of this year as the company went from 12,000 employees down to around 2,000 employees. So it was a great chance to have the team beneath me succeed into leadership roles. But just a quick perspective. So I joined in 2014. We had a new CEO. The first thing he asked us to do was separate our storage business called Veritas. So we sold that. That was announced and sold in October 2015. A $7 billion divestiture that actually happened officially January 2016. In May of 2016, we had private equity come in and invest. Our CEO stepped down. We established this wonky thing called the Office of the President. If anyone's ever worked under that, it's lots of fun. You've got 3 people leading the company. Shortly thereafter, we made a big acquisition of Blue Coat, which really added to our security portfolio. And with that acquisition, we actually hired that CEO and his leadership team to be part of the new Symantec. At that point, between February and October, we had a rapid fire change. We had an acquisition of LifeLock, which breathed life into our consumer business, NortonLifeLock. We had multiple tuck-ins, and then we did another big divestiture of website security. And I wish you all were live and I could see your eyes, because I think if any of you've ever done M&A, I thought mergers and acquisitions were relatively straightforward. Divestitures take you to a whole different world of learning and complexity. So we've done about 2 of those thus far in this conversation. And then between May and December of 2018, we had some internal investigations happening related to reporting. We had activists join us, and then we had some leadership transitions coming out of that. So we were excited in the first beginning of 2019, thinking we're going to regain our momentum. We were starting to create some market share around our consumer business and our enterprise business. And then in 2019, as our leadership team changed, we decided to sell our enterprise business to Broadcom. So it's a $10.7 billion enterprise divestiture, and I'll share more with you about that.
Thanks.
Well, you missed some beautiful slides, but that's okay. we'll take on from here. So here's the big backdrop of the work that we did. So we made this $10.7 billion deal or Broadcom made this deal to buy our enterprise business, and we moved from a $5 billion business to a $2.5 billion business. Drastically reduced our employee populations, went from 48 countries down to 8, and focused on reducing stranded costs by $100 million. So all this happened in an announcement in August, and we actually closed the deal in November. So talk about rapid fire change in a global business trying to separate the organizations. Again, I'll talk more about some of the steps we took to support that. So now let's talk about frameworks for operational alignment. So I've given you the macro and micro landscape of what's happening out in the world, and then a view of what we did at Symantec in relationship to rapid fire change with leadership transitions, with acquisitions and divestitures, with organizational shifts, et cetera. And now let's talk about the framework that we used. So I'm first going to just take a step back, and apologies for the words on the slide being so many, but the uber point is I put out a vision in early 2016 to say we in HR have to transform. And we have to do it in a way where everyone knows how to plug into HR. And I've worked with lots of HR organizations, and very often the business says, I don't know who to go to for what. I don't know how to get the biggest value out of you guys. So my goal for the team was, how do you make it easier to plug into HR? We're easy to engage with. We've got easy to understand technology that helps your jobs get easier as managers and employees. We've got a global team that really has global process. And we have business partners who are aligned to the business and COEs who are business relevant. And our HR VSEM, which I'll share with you, which is our vision, strategy, execution, and measurements, remain relevant. But we're here to really impact the business in more meaningful ways. And we're going to be doing it through a more efficient and effective way. And the one thing I was dealing with when I first joined Symantec is we had regions in Europe, in Asia, in the United States, in North America, in emerging markets, and they all had different HR practices and processes, and you can't scale. And it's also very hard for employees to see what a consistent practice is when they have members around the globe they're managing. So my goal was to put forth a consistent way by which we did business around the globe. And if we decided to localize something, it was because it was advantageous and necessary. So getting rid of redundancy. And then lastly, we made certain that everyone's roles were clear and compelling, such that the members not only felt like they were learning and growing, but they are really proud of their work. So this was a journey back in 2016 that my team I thought was pretty audacious, but this was the groundwork we had to lay in order to be business relevant to the organization and help the business through all the transformations. And I think for HR to be its best, you've got to be 1 or 2 steps ahead of the business. You can't be following them, because very often they'll get ahead of you, and then you'll have to go spend most of your time cleaning up things that if had you been ahead of it, you would have helped them be more successful. So the operating principles we set out for in the HR organization, this is before I think growth mindset was more front and center than it is today, but we've got to think about how we achieve more growth mindset versus being victims. We had to get really clear on how we're going to work around this operating model. We had to have mechanisms to drive alignment, accountabilities, and business focus. And that's things like how often you meet, what kind of conversations you have, what do you hold in terms of metrics for success. I want to make certain that there was integrated learning happening in all of our operational routines. I don't know how many of you have sat through these before, but I've sat through business reviews as well as functional reviews, and they become dog and pony shows. There's no interaction. It's mostly a tell show. It's not an iterative, here's what I'm solving for. Does this make sense? And if so, how can you help me kind of conversation? So we really ingrained that into how we talked about the rhythm of our business. We focused in HR on developing skills in conflict management and giving feedback. If we aren't good at that ourselves within our organization, how can we help the business be good at that? And I'm someone who firmly believes that conflict leads to better outcomes. And of course, it has to be, constructive conflict. But everyone nodding in the room and one person at the end of the table not agreeing tells me that there's something that person sees that others don't. So really looking at ways to make certain we're getting all the concerns out and all the sort of questions or perspectives on the table really is going to make for better solutions. And then closed loop feedback, which is basically when I do something, how did it work? Was it successful? And how do we make certain it's better the next time? And then how do you have constant cascading of your performance outcomes into the organization? So you're not passively sitting back, rolling out things and not making certain that they're being effectively used and utilized and that they're solving the problem that you set out to solve. So I'm a big believer, every time you start off with something, you get clear about the problem that you're solving for, then you create operating guidelines so everybody knows how to play in this new world. Another busy slide, but the most important thing to look at is the framework. So I learned this framework at Cisco Systems. It was basically called an VSEM. So basically you have the mission of the company that you're trying to support as an organization, and then you have what your mission or vision is of your particular function. So you create a vision that's typically 3 years out. And so the HR mission was about making Symantec the place where talented people want to be, innovate, grow, and make a difference in creating a secure world. Then you create your 1 to 3 year strategy. And these are things that should be iterative over the next 3 years, but are focused around the pillars and platforms. And so we picked things such as talent optimization, culture, and organizational effectiveness to be the things that supported our HR strategy, because we were all about sustainability. We're in the opportunity to turn this business around. So what do we need in terms of long-term business support and growth? And we picked on an execution front, the 3 pillars you see. And underneath of those pillars, these were typically initiatives that were 12 to 18 months in duration, and they would morph and change. And sometimes they'd remain because we either didn't get as far as they wanted to, or they became even more critical and important. And as you can see, there are things that I think all of you probably have on your agendas around retention, around workforce planning, succession, making certain you've got the right culture. And that culture isn't just culture for culture's sake, it's integrated with the business. So it's clearly aligned to support the business strategy. And then things like organizational effectiveness, which is always the hallmark of really good, strong human resources. And then beneath each of these pillars, you have important measurements to support those pillars. So this was the overall HR strategy. And then each of the organizations in HR had their particular VSEMs that aligned to this. So you had one for talent, for communications, for rewards, for business partners, et cetera. So it all came a system by how we did our work. This took a couple of years to get right because people were learning along the way. And we used this as a basis for how we held each other accountable, how I held my team accountable for their performance, and how we communicated to the business, because the business needed to understand where we were spending our time and whether what we were sharing or focusing on was really going to support where the business was going. And I'm certain all of you have your HR operating models. This is not necessarily unique, but basically our promise was to deliver people and org strategies that maximize business performance and engagement. So at the top, you've got your centers of excellence that provide market-driven scalable solutions. On the far left bottom, you have shared services, which to me is the engine. If they're doing all the things that are around efficiency and scale around programs, it allows the COEs and the business partners to be spending time on high impact relationships to the business. And you've got your business partners that are either customizing and or executing on talent solutions for our clients. So you go up the transmit innovation to process enablement to scalability and customization, which is a fine line to balance, and then going from transactional to strategic. I'm showing this not because it's pretty or interesting, but this is a deeper dive. So this kind of walks you through who's in the HR solutions and delivery organizations, what do the COEs look like, and what are the business aligned HR sort of responsibilities around business partnering. So this was our ecosystem. And we use this as a way to ensure that, this was basically a flywheel. If this is working right and everyone's clear about what their responsibilities and focus areas are, and they have the right talent, then this would really be accretive pretty rapidly, exponentially to the business. So I've walked you through the framework for how we organized our business. Let's talk next about soft tissue and trust. And I know I'm talking to an experienced crowd of HR practitioners who know how important it is around team. So I don't want to, tell you things you already know. I'm just going to reinforce a few points. So we all know the spectrum of team formation, right? So you know the traditional working group versus the pretend team, the potential team, the real team, and the high performance team. And we've all probably worked in teams that are in various aspects of these particular or team dynamics. And what I will say to you is that this takes hard work. In that, in teaming, it's much like my weight and go up one day and down the next. So you have to really be purposeful in how you think about team formations, about how you get a group of people who have expertise as individuals, but as a team don't support each other or don't work effectively together for various reasons. And so this work requires a lot of attention, a lot of conversation, a lot of work related to clarity of roles, people dynamics. We used lots of different ways to identify people's particular strengths. One in particular we used was called colors. So we got really clear about whether you're red, blue, yellow, green is your primary, meaning did you like to get action? Did you like to think a little bit more? Did you want to be more relationship driven? Were you more process driven? And we use those types of things to help build the team formation and performance. So it wasn't just frameworks and templates and operating reviews. Those were critical, but it was also conversations. It was also understanding each other's strengths and where you got when you're in moments of stress. Because in what we do every day, there is stress in it. And so you need to know what's your resting place and where's your place where things may show up that people aren't used to showing up, and need to understand the intent. So really understanding that intent and trust was really critical for us. And then what we came up with was an HR mantra after a series of pulse survey reviews, lots of roundtables that were held by my team, as well as me and skip levels. We decided that we had to get really serious about how we're going to be in HR. So we actually wore this on the badge, and I still have mine, and actually will probably take this with me wherever I go. But just to be specific, we'll get actionable feedback while it's relevant and take it when it's given. We'll show respect to everyone, and take away my assumptions, which is like take judgment out, suspend it, and be there to listen. Back to Adrian's point, I'll give myself the time to ask questions and also take the time to educate others. I'll give my colleagues the room to speak and take the time to listen, and I give my full commitment and take accountability for my outcomes. So it's no more of blaming each other. And I've seen in the past HR organizations, when they're dealing with the business, throw each other under the bus. Well, that wasn't my fault. That was the town organization's fault or the compensations team's fault. And just realize every time you indict a team member, you're indicting the function. So it's really important that we're all in it together and hold accountability together. And that was really critical for my team to understand. Now, as you think about the HR mantra in response, it was, I will give respect, thanks, input, and the spotlight to others, and I'll take feedback, time, the opportunity to learn and build my knowledge. So sounds super simple, and it took us a while to get this boiled down to these simple statements, but it was really, really important. And so I can't emphasize enough in the world we are in today, where we're now all on Zoom, which actually could be a good thing. So we're now on equal footing versus some people in the room and some people on the phone. It's so important to build this soft tissue, because this stuff will get lost as you get into, getting to deadlines, getting to accountability, getting to commitments. And if you don't have this trust in this open dialogue, that stuff will eventually erode and people will either burn out, leave, or disengage. So next thing is, let's talk about how we put this into action. So I've got a couple of case studies. With my 5.5 years at Symantec, there's so many things I could have spoken about, but I'm going to pick two that I think are critical. One's around what we did in support of the business, driving a business transformation, and one's what we did in HR just to get better and more effective, not only for ourselves, but in how we delivered success to the business. So the first one's around the $10.7 billion divestiture of our Symantec enterprise security business, which was monumental and huge. And there's lots of stories behind that, and I'll tell you whatever I can. And then there's the work we did around operating alignment within our team. So this was the work we had ahead of us. So the story is, it's 2019. So last summer, we anticipated that Broadcom was going to actually acquire both the entire business. So we have an enterprise business, which is an enterprise security business, and we had a consumer business called Norton LifeLock, which I'm assuming many of you, if not all of you, know this business and probably have some of our products. And so we were like, wow, this is a great exit for the businesses, because we've been struggling with how we grow our enterprise business. The consumer business was a cash cow, fueling the enterprise business, but wasn't having the growth it needed to have. And then Broadcom came in and realized, I don't think we want the consumer business. We just think we want an enterprise business. So that was announced in August. And it wasn't actually a sale of the business, it was an asset purchase. So basically, Broadcom could pick and choose whatever they wanted out of our enterprise business, kind of a cafeteria style plan, which is much more complex than saying we're buying the whole business lock, stock, and barrel, all that comes with it, good, bad, and ugly. So it was a pretty big lift for these teams to have to go into this, because at the end of the day, a lot of people are going to lose their jobs, because Broadcom was mostly focused on the engineering, sales, IP part of the business. So if you're in shared services, if you were in HR, IT, finance, legal, marketing, you likely did not have a role going forward with the Symantec business, but you might have a role in the new imagined Norton LifeLock business, which was the remaining business that the now company is now known as. So we came up with 4 tracks, okay? The first one was with the consumer business unit, Norton LifeLock, how do we make certain that that's our new bread and butter that will be remaining? So how do we make certain it's ready to be stood up by itself? It's a solely, run public company. So everything from the new company name to the org structure to enablement to core real estate and HR. I had real estate underneath of my belt as well. So my job got even more complex because we had so many shared sites, so many sites in general around the globe that we've been optimizing over the last several years. We had to get really clear about what would Norton be looking like from a global perspective. The track 2, which was the one that was probably of equal, if not higher risk to make certain this deal went through, is how do we work with Broadcom to understand, the stranded costs, work on product data sharing architecture, finalizing assets, that's employees, technology, patents, and then make certain on day one that our order to cash processes work, that we could actually transact that business with Broadcom so they could actually run the business. If that didn't go well, this whole thing would be at risk. The third thing was around transition management. And again, I wish I could look at you guys in the eyes to see, has anybody ever dealt with the TSA or transitionary service agreement? It's really hard. So basically what that means is that you are helping that business that you're selling stand up for the new business. So you have to continue to run things even though you don't own it anymore. And that's everything about real estate, IT, engineering, sales. So it was a lot of work related to not only how we stood that business up for success as we transitioned it, but it was also a relationship to the employee, to the partner, to the customer. And the last one, which is a lot of time that the HR team spent, was around stranded costs. And that was everything around organizational structure, real estate, people. So this was, if we didn't get the stranded costs out, then we would not be able to successfully launch the new consumer business against a new profit and margin profile. So these tracks made it, I guess the story behind this story is these tracks made this a very complex project. And to make it as simple as like 4,000 employees, we're going to be moving from the Symantec company into the Broadcom enterprise business. And they had to look at every single individual. And it took them a couple of months to understand that, which is actually pretty quick when you can think about we were global businesses with 2P arrangements, transfer arrangements with countries. So my employee relations team, my HR business partner team, were deeply entrenched in this work, and it was work that we wanted to move rapidly through because we had employees sitting around saying, "What about me? What's this mean for me? I don't know if I want to go, and if I don't go, I don't have a job." So you can only imagine the HR angst that was created with this whole thing. So transparency was really, really important. So I mentioned the overview, but the deal was signed in August. It actually executed a month early, November 3rd. So over that 90 days, we had to manage the employee census, which is transferring those 4,000 employees. We had TSAs we had to stand up. We'd identify all the shared assets. We had to execute on separation strategies, which is like, okay, you're not going to need HR anymore, but you're going to need some support related to how you think about talent acquisition, some of the data sharing around employees in terms of our workday relationships and interfaces. We had to work on things like simplifying post-sale of enterprise assets, day one readiness. So when that deal gets transacted on November 3rd, they better be able to do business on November 3rd, the Broadcom business. And then you had to also complete all the regulatory filings. And then our goal was to try and exit out of these TSAs efficiently and expeditiously, because very often employees were on TSAs on behalf of Symantec for Broadcom, but they were not going to have a job 6 months after the TSA was complete. So how do you keep them engaged? How do you think about retention? And then how do you make certain that if you want to retain that employee to go to Norton LifeLock, how do you make certain they want to stick around for that? So lots of moving parts.
And Amy, it's Adrian, just joining on stage briefly. We've got about another 2 minutes.
Okay, almost done.
Close
Great.
out. Yeah, amazing story. Thank you.
So our guiding principles around how we thought about the separation planning was we wanted to prioritize the speed of separation. We wanted to think about minimizing impact on customers. Basically, everything that wasn't separated, a separation project got stopped. So all the cool things we were working on the HR front or on the financial marketing front were really suspended until we got this done. Our work in HR was around org design, talent selection, comp. We had a PMO where we worked on escalating separation. Teams drive the work, the SMO drives the process. So it really put responsibility into the business to run this project. And then you got to run the business accordingly on top of all that. And so what we did, here's the interesting part, is we established an operating cadence. We created operating covenants because we had a whole list of things we had to do for Broadcom, and if we didn't, we'd be in breach of the contract. So everybody knew what those things were. We had operational metrics, daily stand-ups, and a lot of discussions around interdependencies. If IT did something and HR didn't do it, what would be the rules of engagement for the employees? And then we had to make a lot of decisions quickly with actions to mitigate. And then we had to do a lot of work around your technical IP, your operational metrics, and risk and roadblocks. This was the operating structure we ran it under. So you had a steering committee, an executive leadership team, and then you had people working in each of these work streams. So it was a truly cross-functional, cross-organizational team. We met every day, even on weekends, and we drove this process through templates, through discussion, through accountability, through reporting out to the board level on a very regular basis. So that leads me to the next ones, and I'm going to speed through this one, but this is the one that we worked on related to HR Operations Alignment Group. And just very briefly, so many times in HR, we launch 1,000 ships to the business, and they're like, whoa, there's too many things you're asking me to do in any given moment. And very often the HR teams aren't talking to each other about what they're launching. And so it's confusing to the business. It takes time out of the HR organization around optimization. So we created this operating group to build stronger operating mechanisms around planning and managing programs, around reviewing, assessing, and monitoring recommendations, around timing and planning, around integrating roadmaps. So what we're doing in rewards ought to integrate with talent, which ought to integrate with M&A and analytics, et cetera. So how do you resource and prioritize your resources? And so this was all around the horizontal view of how you think about HR in terms of a product organization that's delivering products and value to the business. How do you synchronize it? How do you make certain that we're all on the same page and that we have something that is digestible to the business, but also something that we can actually digest in terms of resources and prioritization? So this team met bi-weekly and monthly. We report out to the HR leadership team. We had a huge calendar, a roadmap strategy. Everyone had a VSCM, and we had lots of work around stakeholders. And just a couple templates to walk you through. We had a rule of engagement that everyone had to show up with their homework done in these meetings. There had to be some conflict, but it had to be professional. There need to be clear interdependencies, no passive aggressive politics. Your say-do accountability had to be strong. And we took into account all the different personalities and working styles to ensure we got to the best solutions. And so we would always look at, what are we solving for? What's the current state? What do you want to try and drive towards future state? What's the benefit of making this change, and how do you prioritize it? This was sort of the workflow, and then these were the templates that we used. So everybody on the team, when we had projects in HR, had to create this business case of what, why, goals, what's in scope, what's out, and then what are the interdependencies to get there. So this was a very critical pivot point for us to really get business driven and how we ran the business of HR. And we did things like team overview around department budgets. We did what's the value creation, like I just mentioned, the services offered, what are the interdependencies, and then what's the resourcing and what we're going to do to improve the process. So all this came together using these types of templates. So in summary, thank you, Adrian. I think I brought this baby home, hopefully within the 2 minutes, is you got to have a clearly defined strategy and what you're trying to drive towards and solve and priorities. You must pay attention to cross-org interdependencies. I mean, absolutely critical what the downstream impacts of a decision may be on something that happens upstream, downstream. You got to be agile, fluid, and pivot quickly. There's so many times we're going down the path and said that's not going to work, or hey, things have changed, we've got to shelve this, or let's dumb this down a bit. It's getting way too over-architected. Let's take our ego out of it and do what's right. And then build trust and make the investments. That's having constant conversation. That's being constructive. That's being humble. That's asking. That's not advocating. It's in the state of inquiry and curiosity. So all those things are super critical when you're going through rapid change. And in conclusion, I'd say, especially now when we all are working in very different ways under lots of uncertainty and or rapid growth, how do you make certain you're holding things together beyond just the templates, but also the relationships and the trust? So thank you. I know you probably all are exhausted from all that I shared with you, but I'm so passionate about this, and I hope that you guys can take some important takeaways from this, and I'm happy to provide more input during the Q&A session. Thank you.